another episode of Let's Talk About It, and we have a great show in tune for you today. So hold on tight to your seats and tune in and be able to be empowered by today's topic. Before we introduce our guests, we're going to introduce ourselves. I am William Burties. I am your co-host for this evening, and then we also have Mr. Clinton James. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, it's Clinton James here, local real estate broker here in San Diego. I gotta tell you all the time where y'all can find me. Y'all can find me in the corner of working on myself, lean and inspiring others. Drive. That's the corner on that spot. And yeah, we have a great guest today. And I always say, hey, today's Tuesday. We're going to take over Tuesday. It's called Taco. It used to be Taco Tuesday. So now it's called Let's Talk About It Tuesday. Let's
Yes.
get it.
We're taking over for Jesus.
There you go.
So, Clinton, man, you found us a really great guest today. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about our guest today, and as he's going to introduce himself.
Yeah. I'll have him introduce himself. But Alberto Gomez, how we met is that he got introduced to me. His wife actually introduced me to him because he's doing an amazing project right now. He's studying for his PhD, and which is awesome. You know, he's an intelligent guy. We already know that the PhD, right? So, but what he's doing is he's doing something that's groundbreaking. I think that's going to really open up the gate to do more studies, because I think that we have to have more factual information when it comes to when we talk about racism, right? But I think his past as or his past education and stuff, and that's what kind of interested me in him and having him on the show to talk about it, because I did the test, the study. I remember I went to your office and he taught me how to breathe properly, and I'm like, I never bred, I wasn't breathing properly before, you know. But at the same time too, it not only breathe properly, but it also it helps you understand how to relieve stress really quickly, right? Because that's his specialty. That's what he studies and stuff. But what he's doing is showing the correlation between racism and stress and trauma. So I mean, I'll have him talk about it himself, you know. But I was just so interested that I said, hey, you need to talk to get this out to the people in all different genres, because I think now is the time where we should be. This is a topic that should be studied too.
All right. Thanks for that, Clinton. So just to start off a little bit about myself, my name's Alberto Gomez. I am a fourth-year clinical psychology PhD candidate. I will be starting my internship this summer, actually, at the Brooklyn VA. I am also a military veteran. Did 8 years in the Marine Corps.
Was it hoorah?
Hoorah, yeah.
Okay.
Hoorah's the name.
Hoorah, okay.
And so, yeah, after I did my service in the military, I'm originally from the East Coast, born in New York, grew up in Rhode Island for a bit. After I joined the military, that's what brought me out here. After I did my 8 years, I got out, and as soon as I got out, I kind of had a plan that I wanted to go for this degree, really because just trauma, stress, and how people manage it and handle it really piqued my interest. It started with PTSD, and it was really more about, like, they have a running joke that they say that psychologists get into the field because they're trying to figure out their own problems.
Okay.
And so growing up, you know, I didn't have the best upbringing. Both my parents were immigrants from the Dominican Republic, and mostly grew up in a single mom home. But a lot of stress, you know, in you know, pretty bad neighborhoods, and just watching peers, people around me trying to figure out life in the midst of all this stress. Really I carried it in my life. That's why when I was looking at military branches, I picked the Marine Corps, because they're trained, right, to deal with high amounts of stress. And it actually taught me, you know, going to boot camp, getting this training, going on deployments. It really showed me that when you learn how to manage your stress, you can almost do anything, if not anything.
Very true.
Right.
Very, very true.
And so, starting this program, I got into it. I did a lot of research in trauma. I've done research surrounding trauma, right? So, things such as spirituality. Things with, like, even chronic pain. A lot of people that deal with chronic pain tend to have a history of trauma, right? And so there's a lot of different aspects that how trauma can affect a person. It can affect them physically, and obviously mentally. But when we think mentally, we think obviously PTSD, but it can also bring out depression and anxiety. So it plays out in different ways.
So let me ask you this, Alberto, or pretty soon Dr. Gomez. um, specifically within the frame of this conversation, when it comes to the history of Black people being here in the United States, has the trauma that our fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers and mothers went through, is that affecting where we're at today as a Black culture when it comes to how we approach things? Is it trauma still there for us?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, for sure. There's other doctors too, and there's actually a doctor here in San Diego. His name is Dr. Rodney Hood. He's actually, if you're familiar with him, he's actually, I got in contact with him, and he showed me a manuscript that he's working on, kind of basically what you're talking about, discussing, but it's really intergenerational trauma, right? And how that plays out. And so that can play out in many different ways. The most clear-cut way is biologically, right? When during the course of our lifespan, we have, everybody knows about DNA, but most people don't know how it kind of plays out. We don't express all our DNA genes all at one point, right? Different situations in different environments in life, different stressors start causing our DNA to express certain parts of it. And so if we have our grandparents' grandparents, and their DNA sequence expressing certain parts, it starts adding up, right? So biologically, if our grandparents were in a very stressful situation and our body basically deems that, hey, we need to express these certain genes to increase our survivability, it's going to express it more. And then when the next generation comes, if it continues, it starts becoming reinforced, right? But also in terms of like the social aspect of it, right? Trauma, it really affects the way we see the world, how we see others, and how we see ourselves. And so if our parents or our grandparents have a certain amount of stress and trauma that they experienced in their life, they're going to interact with us in a certain type of way, right? So it plays out in many different ways, biologically, socially, mentally. And so to say that all that trauma and stress that happened to our ancestors isn't getting passed down, it's nonsense, right? They've done a bunch of studies on Holocaust survivors and how that affected intergenerationally. African American populations, I'm not too familiar with the literature, but it's not as popular, right? Again, Dr. Rodney Hood, he's looked at it, and he's brought up, he's basically come up with a term called post-traumatic slave stress disorder, right? So the history of slavery and how that changed the genetics, and how heart health is seen for Black people now currently, and how it could stem from that history. So yeah, definitely, those things that our parents and our grandparents went through, that stuff gets passed along until somebody does something about it, and that somebody is usually us, and how we deal with our stress, and how even though biologically, emotionally, mentally, our bodies and minds might tell us to do one thing, having that awareness, right? That self-awareness to still make the decision that although everything in your body's telling you don't do this other thing, what the right decision in mitigating the harm that action can do, right? So it plays out in a lot of different parts. But yeah, I would say that for sure all that stuff, hundreds of years of slavery. How do you expect that to be gone after they abolish it? And then we got decades of segregation, and then that's over, and they're still discriminating. So how do we expect all of that to be gone in the blink of an eye just because the law changed?
Yeah. I love what you're saying, man. We had this discussion, and one of the things that you said with the generational trauma, I kind of resonate with that. Why? Is because just when I was working on myself, right? Because I think that's something that a lot of us have to do as we get to a certain age, and start trying to reflect on yourself, look yourself in the mirror, understand who this person is and why you make the decisions you make, right? And I discovered NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. I think we've had somebody on the show who talked about it, and that's it's kind of like the scientific thing, study of how the brain actually works, the subconscious and the brain works.
Okay, yeah.
Right, so a lot of people think the subconscious is some this holistic thing, you know, like oh, it's energy, but there is energy, right? But it's because one of the things to easily explain what the subconscious is, it's like if you're breathing, like you showed me how to breathe. Now you see, you taught me how to breathe and how to think about it. But in breathing to survive, you don't think about it. So where does that come from, right? If you have to change it up, then you start like thinking about it, right? So that's where the subconscious is, things that, and it kind of is part of the DNA. And it goes back to like the trauma. A lot of the things that you download when you're young
Yeah.
is passed down, even before birth, right?
Yeah,
So
and you got to think there's a lot. You know, if you want to kind of compare it to the neurology of it, the subconscious, that's the subcortical parts of our brain, right?
Right.
That's the amygdala. That's the parts that in our brain is very instinctual.
right,
So you know, amygdala, we don't have much control over it.
right,
But in terms of the breathing, right, in the literature they call it top down.
right,
So using our executive functioning to regulate those subcortical areas.
right,
Right. And so, the subconscious it's a mystery to us. We don't
Right.
really know how it's wired, how it's working.
right,
But using again, yes, that top down process
right,
to kind of, and the biggest trick to it. So I do my main approach in therapy is called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
right,
And this type of therapy really focuses on values.
uh-huh,
And so one of the big things about it, though, is how we get ourselves to behave in a certain way, right?
right,
And a lot of times, I mean, we're taught, we learn, it's by power, forcing ourselves, right?
Right.
By pushing others. And that's honestly, it's very hurtful to do it that
Okay.
way. So it's learning how to build some self-compassion, grace with yourself. And now you're like an orchestra, right? You're just facilitating processes, but you're not fighting, you're not resisting. You're finding the flow of
Right.
yourself.
Right.
In your thoughts, in your feelings, and the first thing is to build that awareness, so then that you can find little loopholes to jump in and now take on a new behavior, right? And see how that feels. And then finding these patterns enough so that you can soon begin to know how to interrupt these cycles that
Right.
tend to repeat itself.
Right.
Especially in terms of intergenerational trauma, right?
right, because that's a comfort zone. That's
Yes,
like the,
exactly.
So how does all that lead to addiction?
So, I mean, can you be more specific?
Well, I mean, I look at it as sometimes people get addicted to things because, especially our community, specifically, I'm thinking about the crack epidemic
Okay.
and things of that nature. Is not that we're genetically predisposed to being more addicted to these things, but somehow because of our environment, we are trying to escape whatever
Yeah.
issues that we have going
Trying
on.
to self-relieve, right?
So how does trauma relate to addiction?
So, right, in terms of trauma, and again, so I'll say this. Most of the world experiences at least more than one trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But 70% of us recover from it. Only about 30% get PTSD. Right? So in most cases, the human mind is very resilient to adversity and trauma. Right? Now, when you start adding more trauma, it becomes harder for that individual to recover. Right? So it starts piling up. Right? I don't know if you're aware of the ACEs studies. There's a study that Kaiser did, and they looked at young children in adverse childhood events. That's what ACE stands for, adverse childhood events. And they found that the more adverse events that these people had at childhood, the more susceptible they were to mental disorders, substance use, right? All the bad stuff. So in terms of your question in substance use, when the trauma starts building up, you start looking for an escape. You look for something to self-relieve, right? Even if it is for that quick 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a whole day, right? It's our instincts to find some relief, right? Because we can handle so much stress, especially when we're not prepared for it, right? That's what I've learned when I looked at my history and everything I learned and learning how people do really hard stuff. They prepare themselves for that stress. That's what boot camp is for,
Right,
They prep
right.
us for that. But when you're thrown in the fire and you don't get a chance to catch your breath and it keeps piling on,
Right.
if you see a little cave that you can just catch your breath for and it just happens to be a crack pipe, who can blame that person, really?
Mm.
You just give me an aha moment.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Sure,
No, for me personally.
okay.
Yeah.
I was like, damn.
For me
But
personally.
yeah, this is my question on that, because there's these gurus out here right now who are saying embrace the trauma, because that's how you kind of discover
Oh, yeah.
the real you, right? And a lot of, and I'll say more young men are listening to that. Now, I think how you deal with trauma is different for every demographic, right? You know, so, but at the same time too, when you have like, and I'm going to say the name, like people like David Goggins,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So it's like,
Stay hard.
yeah, embrace the suck, you know what I'm saying?
Hey, he definitely prepped for that.
Right, you know, and people are listening to that, right? Is that is that a way of dealing with trauma, or is that a bad or good way, you would say?
I mean, it all depends, right? On
Right.
how the person perceives it and what they do with that information, right?
Right.
I will say this: the most effective treatment known today for PTSD is prolonged exposure. So it's literally narrating your trauma in the United States, narrating your trauma over and over again. And usually, when people start this therapy, they're just saying the story like verbatim, whatever, right? They're kind of numb to it.
Mm-hmm.
But saying the story enough kind of opens these subconscious channels, right?
Right.
It's that you start turning on those subcortical things that you might have numbed out. Before people even get there, though, they start avoiding therapy, right?
Mm.
And this is again with PTSD. With trauma, what that kind of shows is that trauma is an experience, just like any other experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in our brain, it's a very important experience. And
Right.
we got to pay attention to all those details because our life was at threat, right? And so we hyper focus on those details, and our subconscious, our mind, our perception starts to look for those cues to let us know, like, hey, this might happen again. And so we tend to avoid and avoid those situations to minimize the risk. But the reality is that when you expose yourself, because with PTSD, people then, you know, if the water bottle was part of your trauma, now you don't want to even look at a water bottle.
Right.
But it's just a water bottle, right? So getting that information in your head, right, so that you can essentially process those emotions so that this water bottle can once again be just a water bottle instead of a threat to you.
So you're kind of saying you got to face that. You got to face that
You
fear.
gotta face it in a healthy way. You know, you can't just, again, you gotta prepare for that stress. You always
Right,
gotta prepare
right.
for the stress. You can't throw yourself in there and expect it to be gone in a day, right?
Right.
So the exposure is just your brain rewiring that information so that there's not such a heightened sense of emotion attached to it. And so that's what our subcortical part of our brain, the important part of our brain, the number one priority is to keep us alive.
Sure.
Anything that
Sure.
threatens our survivability, our brain starts programming it.
Fight or flight.
Pay attention. Yeah,
Right.
fight or flight. Pay
Right.
attention to that. Hey, that's safe. Oh, that's good and pleasurable. That's
Yeah.
where we're good, right? And so our brain's always doing this stuff all day without us even noticing. And so if we're not, again, practicing that awareness,
Right.
that my heart starts racing when I see this water bottle, right? And then you get stuck with the decision: do I just avoid it, or do I keep exposing myself to this thing so that it doesn't have this power over me?
So let me ask you this, because I've seen this on like Instagram and stuff, and it's funny, but I actually know there's something really harmful attached to it for these people. So like Maury Povich show, not the Are You My Baby Daddy show, but he would have shows like people like this lady was scared of olives. Like you bring out like a jar of olives, she like runs.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I seen a lady afraid of cotton balls.
There's one afraid of peaches, right?
I didn't see that one.
I think I know what you're talking about.
But how was someone, and we could go on and ask more depth, how does someone like overcome something like that? Like, first of all, how do you get scared of something like that?
Right.
How does something like that
People
traumatize
can
you?
be scared of anything, man. If the situation's set up. But you know, in the scenario you're explaining, it's not helpful because we're not helping the person feel safe in that situation, right? We're kind of reinforcing that threat response.
Oh no, they run.
Yeah.
They run.
Do they chase them with it?
Yeah, they chase them with
yeah,
it.
That's
Yeah.
not helping.
Yeah.
You know, that's not helping. So
It's like that lady like Carl Lewis running down the street.
I'll say this. Again, in PE, prolonged exposure, they start with the narrative, but then they start giving you in vivo exercises, right? So they start saying, okay, that stairwell that really scares you after like section 5, we want you to walk by it, right? After section 6, we want you to walk through it, right? So it's escalate. You know, you build up to it, right? You don't just drop the hammer on day one.
Right.
I'll give you a personal example. It's not a PTSD. It's a fear response, right?
Okay.
I was in Tokyo, Japan. I was in Tokyo Tower, and they have these glass floors where you can see through it.
I was just about to talk about it. Go ahead. I'll ask you the question.
And I've done height. I've skydived before, but it's been a while since I was high. And this was like 2 years ago. And I was gonna walk, and my body froze, and I didn't know why. I was like,
Right.
what the heck? I was kind of pissed.
Right.
And my wife was there with me, and I was like, yo, what's going on? She was like, what's going on? I was like, hey, for some reason, my body doesn't want to move. So what I did is that I circled that glass floor like 5 times, and then I cut a corner. I put my foot on the glass, and then I kept going, until I fully walked on it, little by little, inching myself there. I didn't want to leave that glass alone until I walked over it.
Right.
And so, because I knew if I walked away from that situation,
Right.
next time it would only get harder. Because the more you avoid it, the harder it starts getting.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'm programming my brain, okay, that's dangerous.
Right.
And I mean, honestly, a glass floor is kind of dangerous. It was pretty thick. But I mean, who in the right mind wants to walk through a glass floor?
Right.
Right? And so, yeah, I didn't want to walk away from that situation because I felt like I was going to start feeding into that fear.
Gotcha. And this is what I was going to ask you, because some people have common fears, right? And some fears are not based on trauma. Do you think all fears are based on? Okay.
No. That's a hard question, right?
Right.
When we think of trauma, like how are we defining it, right? Because
Right.
trauma really comes down to situations where your life's at risk, right?
Like say public speaking.
So public speaking is a
Right.
big fear.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's no real trauma behind it unless you were like super bullied as a kid, right? And
Right.
It kind of does stem from somewhere though. Nothing's not for not for no reason.
Right.
There's probably a story behind it. But it doesn't have to be traumatic, I guess I could say. Right? It has to be something that really caused a lot of distress.
Right.
And that doesn't make it traumatic, right? That's the big argument. Like, what is traumatic? Right now in the DSM-5, on the book How We Diagnose People, it has to be life-threatening, and you can experience it, but your loved one can tell you they almost experienced it, and you can get it that way. But you can't like look out on a phone and see someone go through something and now you're traumatized by that. Like that doesn't qualify, right?
Right.
So it's kind of, they're really trying really hard to define it because some people they say they get bullied at work and they'll say they got PTSD, and technically that doesn't meet the criteria, right? So it has to be life threatening. Your life has to be at a threat, or sexual assault, right? You might not die from sexual assault, but you are getting severely violated, right? So it's almost like the death of your ego at that point.
Right.
Right. So for a situation to be traumatic, and that's kind of like part of my study is really looking at how to separate things that are traumatic, stressful,
Right.
right? And that's the thing, when we look at discrimination, you can get discriminated, but your life might not be at threatened, right?
Right.
It could definitely be threatened, but you can be discriminated and your life's not being threatened. But what's the stress that comes with that?
Right.
Right?
It's a heightened sense of fear.
It's a heightened sense of loss of security.
Right.
Of being able, just like having a place in the world and being respected as an individual.
Right.
Right? And so, in my study, just to go a little bit deeper, when we look at cardiovascular diseases, right? Again, trauma. 70% of people recover from it, right? It mostly affects our brain, psychological trauma, unless you had an injury. But stress, right, when it's chronic, it starts wearing and tearing on your body. It wears and tears and wears and tears, and that's what causes cardiovascular diseases. That wear and tear, day in and day out, right? That heightened stress response always on and you're not being able to turn it off is causing all the resources that allow our body to keep living, to keep reproducing cells, to digest. All those resources are going to our stress response, right, to keep us alive.
Right.
Man, you kind of gave me another
Moment.
aha moment.
We should talk more.
You need to talk
No,
to somebody.
this one I
William.
could kind of pitching because when I asked you the question about the addiction
Yeah,
part
yeah.
earlier, and you're relating that to heart disease and being in stressful situations all the time, is you need an escape.
Yeah.
But the escape is, it sounds like what you're saying is necessary.
In turn.
Well,
Yeah.
It's necessary.
Yes.
But too much of it could be a bad thing.
No,
though, right?
but the choice on what you do
To escape.
to
Right.
escape
So,
could be harmful.
I wouldn't even
Gotcha.
say escape. We need to return to homeostasis.
Okay.
Right? We need to return to a state of relaxation. We need to quiet down that stress response. And the thing is, when most people are high, their stress response is still on, but mentally it quiets down, right?
Okay.
But yeah, we need at some point. It's okay. And you know this analogy. It's
Right.
like a car and an oil change,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
We need to change our car oil every 3 to 6 months.
Right.
But if we wait every year to change that oil, that car's gonna break down a lot quicker.
Right.
Right.
You can think of your oil change once you relax, and your heart decreases, and your parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest response, turns on, because that's when all your cells start duplicating. That's when you start digesting your food. That's when all the processes that literally keep you alive in a state of just relaxation work. When we're stressed, all the blood, all the resources go to our major muscles, speed up our heart, because now it thinks we're in danger. We're getting chased by a lion or a bear. So we don't gotta worry about digesting our food. We gotta worry about running, being quick, fighting.
Right.
Right.
So all the resources are going to those functions, but those functions are not the ones that keep us sustainably alive, long term. Right?
It's just survival in that moment.
Exactly.
Right. So it's like constant survival. Yeah. Mode you're in,
Exactly.
right?
And
Okay.
so, right, and so in terms of stress and trauma, right, and so that stress, that survival mode, it's not keeping our cardiovascular functioning optimally. It's just doing short term, right? And so we get stuck there. That's when we start getting these cardiovascular, because inflammation goes up, everything goes up, because it's like you're just revving the engine all day.
Right.
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 I see what
Right.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not
Right.
filling off the gas.
Yeah.
You kind of gotta let it roll.
You ain't cruising.
You're not
Right.
cruising.
Yeah.
So this leads me to, okay, so this question here, because you say like being at cruise mode is healthy, right?
Yes.
So and it's like, what would you suggest? Would you? And I'm not talking about drugs, like drugs in terms of illegal drugs. Now, some people do take certain types of drugs.
You mean like supplements?
Not supplements, but like over the counter drugs,
Okay,
right? That the doctor would actually, because some people are against it because they say it's bad for your health, but it actually does kind of like calm you down or get you in that homeostasis
Yeah.
unnaturally. Would you say, but it's addictive?
But it's addictive.
Yeah. Some of these
You don't
drugs
even
are.
have to say all that. Look,
Right.
I told
Would
what
you
God
rather
uses the skills of
natural?
learning how to manage stress, right?
Right.
And I mean, I'll use supplements. I'll use things to help, but the goal is to just do it without just me and myself.
So you would suggest that's how you want to manage that stress?
Yeah,
It's natural.
I mean, in the natural state, because
Right.
then let's say you run out, now, or they don't make it anymore.
Right.
Or they find that it is bad for your health. After 20 years, it actually starts killing you, right?
Right.
So essentially, I feel like God gave us everything that we need from day one.
100%. Yeah.
So it's really about us becoming aware, right? Connecting to it, because that's how I feel God sheds His light. It's His power of awareness, and if we use that to become aware of this vessel that He's given us,
Right.
right, and how it works, and everything is unique, right? Realizing how this thing, to the finest detail,
Right.
right, not just overlooking and generalizing. Oh no, just really seeing how this thing is functioning.
Right.
Right, and that takes time. I feel at that point, in certain situations, you know how to get back to that peace, that tranquility, that serenity,
Right.
that thing that brings us back to homeostasis, right?
Right.
But when you're chasing an idea that you've seen on social media,
Right.
that your friend told you about, hey yo, this supplement, it'll hook you up, bro. Like, it
Right.
might, but,
Right.
like long term, like is it how effective is it gonna be in the course of a lifetime, right? So finding
Yeah.
these, and that's the thing. That's why I teach the breathing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean that's because I mean that's something I was kind of like because I know like there's a prevalence and as he said with addiction there's a prevalence of especially when you're in college and stuff you're here to study people to get that focus to take these supplements and stuff right
Like
you know
ADHD,
right
like Adderall and
Adderall and all that stuff yeah so
Well, before we get into that, we want to pay the bills real quick. We're going to take a quick 30-second commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Have you heard about the Hope for Home Ownership Research Program? It allows you to earn 3.5% of your home's purchase price, up to $13,000. This program is easy, and it does not slow down your home purchase or loan process. Just like other research projects, you are paid to be a part of the study. This income is eligible for use on your home purchase to cover such things as down payment, rate buy-down, or even debt payoff. Spend it or save it as you see fit. Oh, by the way, the average participant also receives an additional $12,000 after closing through the Residential Clean Energy Tax Credit. If you could use up to $13,000 to help purchase a home and could benefit from an additional increased tax credit in the range of $12,000, then visit the ahagroup.org/Clinton James or call 61938-49269 for more information.
Okay, we're back with Mr. Alberto Gomez. Pretty soon, Dr. Gomez, and we're talking about trauma and how that affects our daily life and things of that nature. So, before we went to our commercial break, Clinton had a question that.
I had a question
Alberto, or a statement.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that we've seen is there's a huge opioid crisis right now, right? And everybody's trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we deal with this, right? And it seems like there's a gateway that everybody's kind of going into where, as you said, the escapism, everything you talk about is kind of like what do you see when you talk to a lot of people in that who are addicted with addictions, the escapism, right? They're trying to escape the reality of life, the stress of life, and it starts where the doctor might have, right, or they had chronic pain that it was prescribed to them, and then it becomes addictive, right?
Yeah.
Because it's they're trying to get back to that homeostasis all the time. Yeah. Now, because I'm just looking at this, if it's done naturally or unnaturally, is there a level of homeostasis that's bad for you? Like, I mean, or
the level of homeostasis that's bad for you,
right?
You finally see that lion, and your heart's not increasing in speed,
right?
So there's a reason we have a stress response, and
right.
It's useful. We don't want to take that away from people,
right?
That's not the idea. The idea is that your stress response can turn on really quickly,
right?
Just as quick as it turns on, we want that to turn off just as quickly too. Right?
Gotcha.
It's when you get stuck in that stress response and you can't come out of it, right? That's when the damage starts causing.
Right.
Stress is not a bad thing, right? That's the kind of an idea that people have that stress is bad.
Right.
But you go to the gym, Clinton.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You're stressing out your body when you do that.
Yeah,
and when you stress it out and you get out of the gym, now you're going into that recovery mode.
True.
Right? You got to give yourself that recovery mode so you can actually keep your gains.
Yeah.
Right? So the recovery is just as important as the stress.
Right.
It's about creating that balance.
But you see, the thing is, I'm glad you brought up the gym because I don't go to the gym for the pump. I'm too old for that. Like, I have to pump up and stuff. I'm too old for that beach stuff, beach body stuff. But for me, it's meant. I'm unk status now. You know what I'm getting there. I'm status.
I'm big bro status right now.
But what I was saying is that mentally. That's what I go for.
Yeah, you do it to
right.
flex your autonomic nervous system.
Right.
You're doing it and you probably don't even realize it. You're doing it.
Now explain what's that? The
autonomic nervous system.
Yeah.
So that is the nerve. That's part of a branch of our nervous system, right? Our nervous system has different branches. Our nervous system is how all our nerves and our neurons are connected. Basically, our brain is it's a big bundle of connections that are chemical electro. And they go throughout our body. When we control our hands, those are the nerves doing it, right? Mm-hmm. But there's an automatic part of it, an autonomic nervous system.
Right.
And that automatic part is attached to organs, parts of our body, your heart is beating right now, but you're not making it beat. It's just doing it on its own.
Oh, not yeah.
Yeah.
You're breathing. You're not controlling your breathing. It's
Right.
doing it on its own. There's a bunch of automatic processes. And so the autonomic nervous system is also broken up into two branches, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The sympathetic is that stress response.
Mm-hmm.
The parasympathetic is that rest and digest. So that stress response, what it focuses on, again, is keeping us alive during those attacks by lions and bears, right? So our pupils get dilated so we can get more light into our eyes. Our hands get sweaty so we can grip. All the blood temperature, the temperature on the fingertips, the blood in our fingertips goes away from our fingertips because we don't need blood in our fingertips when we're in danger by a physical attack. We need it
that's
in
true.
major muscles,
Yeah.
right? And so all of these connections that are attached to the sympathetic nervous system, how should I say this? They shift all the resources. So all the oxygen, all the blood that is going to our body to certain parts in our parasympathetic, they shift it to different parts of our body or in different ways to that certain part of our body to get us to be able to move and keep us alive in terms of actual physical danger attacking us.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of parasympathetic, that's when the blood goes to the stomach. It starts focusing on digesting food, getting those nutrients to the rest of our body. It starts focusing on constricting our pupils, right? So keeping our hands warm, right? Because we'll start losing fingers if they get too cold and there's not enough blood circulating to them. So it's different processes in these two branches. And so when we get stuck in that sympathetic, that stress response, right? Because our brain is it's perceiving stress, danger, so it's keeping us in that sympathetic. It then tends to destroy all the other parts, right? A lot of people, when they're very anxious, they start having stomach issues. Why is that? Because they're in a stress response, and the blood's not going to
Right.
the gut to digest.
That's where you get ulcers, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, and so
That's
you get
great.
ulcers, you can get IBS. There's a whole line of issues you can get from not being able to manage that stress, right? And so being able to get your stress response to turn on when you want it and turn off when you don't need it anymore, right?
All right. So let me hit you on some of this. All right. So our subject of a lot of our conversations for the show is what we say outside of choosing God as the most important decision you make in your life. The other two is the career you choose and the person you marry. Are you able to hit on those choices and working in an environment and creating, or basically choosing a person to marry and choosing a career to go into when it comes to
That stress response.
yes.
Yes. Yeah.
That's kind of like a joke I just said, but I don't know. The joke was real quick. The joke said, "Hey, this wife asked her husband, is a man more powerful than a woman?" And he was like, "No, a woman's more powerful." And she's like, "Why?" She's like, "Well, when a man dies, it takes like 7 or 4 people to carry him to his grave, while a woman does that by just marrying him." So, joke. Disclaimer, joke.
Anyway, so when it comes to stress, relationships can be very stressful.
Right.
I don't think it's no accident that 50% of marriages end in the first 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think that's people.
The first 5 years, really? 50%?
50% in the first 5 years of marriage.
Wow. Okay.
So 50% of people are don't even get past 5 years in their marriage. I think that's them looking for their escape. Honestly, right? They made a decision, and after 5 years, they couldn't find a way to reach homeostasis with this individual, and they said, "All right, I'm out." And in terms of work, right? Most people, when they're experiencing chronic stress, it's from their jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say for both situations, I would say marry who you love and work. Do what you love as work, right?
Right.
But the thing is, a lot of times we think we love somebody, we think we love this job, and after some time, we're like, I can't take this anymore.
Right.
Right. So
that's yes.
and so,
Right. we get stuck in that lust phase that
Yeah.
ends real quick.
And
You
so
know what I'm saying?
and that's all okay, right?
Yeah.
That's all okay as long as you have some level of self-awareness, right? That's
Right.
why I'm stressing that, right?
Mhm.
We have these emotions, we have these feelings, you start having these thoughts. If you can be the observer
Right.
and watch yourself, right? You won't make that rash decision like, okay, now I need to marry this person, right?
Right.
You're able to watch it and let it play out, and then make some more logical decision about how you want to spend the rest of your life with this individual. When it comes to work, right? You know, most of the time we're getting into a job we need to get because we need to make money.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
We're trying to survive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And
I'm stressed because I'm broke.
yeah.
Right.
And so sometimes
Right.
that's necessary, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
Right.
you won't be able to eat.
Right.
True.
But if you
True.
have a certain level of self-awareness, again, just instead of falling into your patterns, just watching how things are playing out, while you're doing this job, start finding what you actually think you would actually enjoy doing. Don't even think about the money aside. Like, how do you like spending your time and your days? And there's so many jobs out there, right? And if there isn't one that you think would benefit, you can probably create it because there's probably a list of people that
Sure.
are down to do it too.
True.
Right? We live in a very unique generation where you could just paint and record yourself and put it on the internet and make money.
That is very true.
Even though artists
Job description influencer.
even though artists make a ton of money and
Yeah.
they're good at it, right?
Yeah.
But essentially really finding a career, a job where it doesn't feel like work.
Right.
But that takes a lot of self-awareness. That takes a lot of time sitting with yourself and not getting caught up in your patterns and thinking, oh, I like this because I do it all the time. It's like,
Right.
no, you're doing that because you feel like you need to.
Right.
And again, that besides just sitting with yourself, is sitting with yourself in a state of homeostasis.
Right.
If you're sitting with yourself in a state of stress, you're not going to make clear decisions.
Mhm.
Right.
You're going to make some impulsive, desperate decisions.
Right.
Right. But when you're sitting with yourself, when you're calm, when you feel like you're learning about yourself, that's when the answers start popping up for you. Right.
Yeah.
That's when you start unlocking some of those thoughts and things you used to believe or whatever. They just become more clear to you.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to, oh, I'm sorry, you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, you hit on something called when you said self-awareness, because it's kind of like we're the only species that God created with that, right? That skill. So, in terms of self-awareness and using that as a tool to actually get out of stress, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that there's levels of that? Because I mean, you have people who do the ice bath, they have people who do the saunas, and then they also stress their bodies out where they can stay in freezing, like the monks can stay in like freezing without any half naked and not freeze to death, or get. So would you say that you have to practice? Practice takes you to different levels of that, where you can control that part of your brain where nobody really taps into or it's hard to tap into?
I think there's definitely levels to self-awareness. I think, and I think you never actually reach the end.
Right.
I'm personally in my journey, I feel like the more I try to dive deeper, the more and more my belief in God is I don't got evidence, but I'm like, yo, there's a point of no denying.
Right.
Right. That is the universal intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's what I believe what is our connection to God. Right.
Right.
Being tapped into that self-awareness, that observing, right, and it becomes really challenging because it's all part of it is detaching from yourself,
right,
from your thoughts and your ideas, and realizing that these are just happening in me because this is the body that God chose me to be in.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So some people look at it as a burden. I see it as a responsibility.
So how does one detach themselves or observe themselves?
I don't think we fully ever do, but we create some distance, again, to watch ourselves. So you asked how...
Because you were saying, like, watch yourself. So
How
does one consciously do that?
So my practice... Consciously, right? That's the hard part. How do you watch that? I meditate on a daily basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
I teach the participants a breathing exercise.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Dr. John Kabat-Zinn. He is, I'm trying to remember what kind of doctor he is, but he's got a book on the principles of mindfulness. and he's teach people about mindfulness in this practice. And so there's a video of him on YouTube, and he talks about a mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And a lot of people, when he asked them what's the most biggest thing you got out of it, and they say the breathing, and he goes, "What do you mean the breathing? You've been breathing your whole life." But what he really explains is that they become intimate with their breathing, right? So that moment when you're breathing, it's having that relationship where it doesn't feel like, oh, it's just another breath, right? It's really coming to the moment where you're realizing everything is happening for the first time, right? There is no such thing as the past or the future, really. It's just this, right? And becoming aware that this body and this mind is part of this moment, but what we really truly are is bigger than this moment, right? And so observing that, really, it takes just you watching your thoughts and not fighting them, just letting them stroll by. And the thing about the mind, it loves attention. It loves attention, and it loves to be right. So, like, after a while, where you're not getting pushed or pulled by your thoughts, it starts hitting you low. It'll hit you with a thought that you haven't even thought about in years to really get your attention.
Right.
So the mind does this little trick where it really tries to become the center of attention when it's just, the mind isn't the master of us, right? Not unless we let it, right? The mind is meant to serve us.
Right.
Right? And so a lot of people...
But we're not taught how to do that.
We're not taught how to do that.
So,
no, not at all, right?
Yeah.
And we learn it from everybody else. And we really, for most of us, we're slaves to our thoughts and our feelings. We never learn how to, like, take a stand and be like, all right, I'm going to let you have your hissy fit mind, but at the end of the day, you're here to serve me, right? And so that takes a lot of discipline, takes a lot of self-compassion, a lot of grace. Because the thoughts it's okay, mind, I get why you're doing this, right? It's having a relationship where you can accept yourself more than anything.
Right.
But at the end of the day, really try to stay aware to not force it in any one other direction from the other, right? So I'll just give you the list of the 7 principles of mindfulness so you can kind of get an idea of the practice, right? The first one is non-judgment, right?
Right.
So not judging anything as good or bad, or when the thought comes, that's a bad thought, that's a good thing. Not judging it, just letting it happen. Second one is patience, right? Sitting with it and not trying to go to the next moment, not waiting. Third one is beginner's mindset, so seeing everything as if it was the first time. The fourth one is trust, right?
Right.
Feeling your intuition and trusting it. Feeling these feelings and trusting that they actually do bring some value. The fifth one is non-striving, right? So that's the one a lot of us get caught up in. We now have this information, now we want to do something with it.
Right.
It's about, no, just chill with it. And then the sixth one and the seventh one, they actually, all those first 5, they can happen in different orders, but 6 and 7 have to happen one after the other. So 6 is acceptance. So after you get all of this information, accepting it, and the 7th is letting it go, right? Because when we start carrying this, we're carrying this baggage. And it can happen in thoughts. Thoughts is the most challenging part, but it can happen with feelings, it can happen with interactions, situations, experiences, right? It's how we carry these things, right? And if we just kind of let it all go, and now it's like, we're like little kids again. That's why I think kids are the purest thing in this planet.
So how does one deal with people in their life who are dealing with stress?
How do we deal with them?
How does one deal with them? You recognize that this family member or friend, whomever, has trauma, because just in what they're doing.
Yeah.
How does the individual relate to them or connect with them or how does one handle that?
The same way you do it for yourself. You give them grace. Give yourself grace. Give them grace. Give them some compassion. I'm not saying now, get on your knees and, what do you want? I'll do anything for you.
Right.
No, give them grace. They're another human soul in this planet, just like us, trying to figure it out. Do the best they can. Right? And really bringing that understanding brings ourselves more comfort than that person.
Okay, so y'all pray for me, because I'm petty Pendergrass when it comes to.
You deserve grace for that too, right?
Thank you, appreciate it.
Right.
But you're self-aware of that, right? You notice that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
yeah.
I mean, there's
And so there it is. This is the trick. Watching it and not trying to force it, but you're aware of it naturally.
Right.
You know what the best decision is. You don't gotta force yourself, but it's about accepting it, giving yourself grace, right?
I think
Makes
that's
sense,
part.
right?
That's part of the overcoming trauma too, right? It's kind of understanding that you're doing the best you can with what you have, right? Kind of
That's
get
all
to
we're
that point. Now the top three that you just said about the overcoming stresses, kind of it seems like it has to do with time, like so. Kind of it's kind of like we create this time thing where we have to get things done. It's this deadlines and all this stuff.
we gotta
So it's
close
kind
the
of, and that's
deal.
hard. That's the hard part because now you're telling me, hey, there's no deadline. Okay, tell your boss that.
Yeah.
I gotta close this deal in 14 days. Yeah.
I'm no stress. You know what I'm saying? But this is what I kind of get from that is that we've kind of evolved as human beings. Like we say, it's generational and stuff. Because I go back to, and we only have a couple of more minutes, but I go back to like when the pyramids were built, right? Civilization. They built some amazing, and still today we can't understand how they did it. But I think, and then they didn't have the English language. They didn't have a lot of tools we have today. Like, so we don't know. Like, we're still trying to figure it out, right? Because, but when you look at how they communicated and told stories, it was all visual and hieroglyphics, right? So, I think one of the things that you're saying is that I think that's kind of like what they had, and it's kind of been lost, right? Where they were more in tune with, because they didn't have the time construct and all that stuff. You know, they were more in tune with that, a sense that of an instinct that of more of being self-aware.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
they were able to tap into that where we kind of put blockers on because it's people think it's holistic. You know,
I don't even think it's blockers.
Right.
I think that we get fed so much information, we let the world tell us who we are.
Right.
Instead of literally sitting with ourselves and deciding who we are.
Right.
Right. We watch movies where they show black young men. And
Right.
How do they portray them? Right.
True.
There's a reason why when you ask most 10-year-old black kids growing up in the U.S., what do you want to be when you want to grow up? A basketball player or a rapper? Right. They don't. It's what they're being exposed to.
Right.
Right. When you don't have TV, you don't have media feeding you this information. It's like, all right, what do I want to be? The brain works completely different.
Right.
Right? We don't have these associations. It's not the quick answer. That's not intelligence, right?
Right.
That black and white answer, that's not real intelligence. Intelligence is creativity,
Right.
right? And so I feel like all this media, all this stuff that gets shoved in our heads by an early age, it kind of takes away the creativity, right? And, you know, they say that creativity, nothing's really creative. We're just remaking things from the past and combining with other things, right?
Sure.
But I don't know, put somebody in a situation where they're not getting exposure from the outside world, and I'd be curious to see what they could come up with, right?
True. That's very true.
So, in terms of the Egyptians, yeah, they were on another level.
Way out of level, you know.
Yeah.
and still we don't understand, but at the same time they were human beings, right? So that's what we know. We can
What we
guarantee
know, yeah.
they were like human, but it's how their way of thinking and how they thought was way beyond their time, right?
Yeah.
So how did they get to that point, and what took it away? That's the thing about that. I'm always kind of like trying to figure out. It's like they were the ones who kind of looked at the stars and determined, you know, like how to put things and line things up with the stars and stuff like that. But yeah,
we got a comment from Deborah McKay. Intelligence is creativity.
You're
It
sure
is,
right,
yes.
Deborah.
It is.
That is true. That is very true.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a left brain, right brain, you'd say, right?
Yeah, that's how they explain it.
Right.
I think you can be more creative if you use both sides of your brain, though.
Right.
But,
right.
yeah.
Right. True.
They say left side's your side, yeah.
You know what's funny
100% of it.
because a few days ago I was talking to some of the people I work with. We were at Balboa Park and we saw some kids out there, and we were discussing that specifically young boys. A lot of times they say young boys have ADHD, and I look at it as they probably, or autism or whatever, and they probably, some cases don't, but you're putting them in confines of school where you got to sit down and do this.
Yeah,
and
Yeah, true.
they're at an age where it's like, I need to be
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
active.
They're over pathologizing kids these days.
Right.
Think
They're
so?
over pathologizing everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that we have the general public has this information, but even in the professional setting, you know, most of America is systems, right? We got the healthcare system, we got all these systems in the school system, and how they play out. It's like they look at a person, they're like, all right, you go to that side or that side, and they kind of determine your future based on these decisions.
Which is crazy, I think, though.
You know, the classroom. I mean, it's a kind of stressful environment, if you ask me. These kids are not in homeostasis, right? They got to sit in this desk for 8 hours a day. We'll let you run around outside for 30 minutes, but you got to get back and do your math after. Like, so, you know, it's kind of ridiculous to say, oh, this kid can't sit still past hour 3, so he must have ADHD, right? Instead of really learning and like, that's the thing. It would take too much resources to find each kid and see how they best learn. Right? That would be the most best.
That'd be ideal, yeah. And
right?
they go to a place that maximizes.
You know, and then I'm pretty sure that kid, when he graduates high school, he knows exactly what job he wants to do.
The only frustrating thing about this conversation is that we got to end it. Because it is almost 7 o'clock.
Construct the time, man.
Don't get too stressed, man.
I'm in homeostasis. But, you know, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you put a lot of, you know, new ideas in my head that I kind of had there, but then I was like, oh, that was what I was trying to verbalize.
Yeah.
And so, Clinton, thanks for bringing Alberto. I'm looking forward to our after show.
And before we quit, real quick, tell people your next steps, what you're trying to do.
So I actually just did my last participant today, so I
Nice.
don't have to recruit. But I will be going to the Brooklyn VA this summer. After that, I'll graduate, get this PhD, and I don't know, maybe open a private practice. I do want to go into academia and do some more research. Especially now in a time where they're kind of cutting funding for diverse groups. So figuring out a way to still get that information because it's needed.
It's needed, absolutely.
Is there a specific group you're trying to help?
Anybody that experiences trauma, which is a lot of people, man.
Okay.
Trauma and stress, and they struggle to get back on their feet.
Man, that is so needed. Well, we thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You know, if possible, we'd love to have you back again.
Yeah.
But you guys tuned into an episode of Let's Talk About It. We'll see you guys same time, same place in a couple weeks. Until then, peace. We out.
Peace.